Our third speaker is Dr. Emile Schrijver. Emile is curator at the Bibliotheca Rosenthaliana, the special part of the Special Collections Division at the University of Amsterdam, where the Braganza exhibition first opened in October. Dr. Schrijver is an expert on post-medieval Hebrew manuscripts and printed books, having published extensively on both topics. He has written a number of introductions to important facsimile editions of Hebrew manuscripts and was involved in the publication of numerous exhibition catalogs, including with Dr. Cohen and Sharon Mintz, the Braganza Collection. Dr. Schrijver. He'll speak to us on Hebrew manuscripts after Gutenberg.
Thank you very much. Allow me to thank the organizers of this event, Dr. Barbara Beeman, Dr. Melanie Holcomb of the Metropolitan Museum, and Dr. Jacob Wise of Yeshiva University Museum for the honorable invitation to speak here, actually, in this #1 venue and on this prime occasion. Although he's not here right now, I would also like to thank Mr. René Braganza of Zurich, who's given and is still giving me the opportunity to work with this collection. I mean, actually, we're looking at wonderful images here of his collection, but the privilege to work with the originals and the privilege to have been in the position to choose what to show to you and what not to show to you has been a #1 experience. And one thing that you have to realize by looking at this, looking at the exhibition, we're showing only 15% of the collection of René Braganza. So it's not that we had nothing to choose from. I would like to thank my co-curator of the exhibition, Sharon Lieberman-Mintz. She's been mentioned a couple of times, who brought me in touch with René Braganza in the first place, and my co-authors and co-editors of the catalog besides Sharon Mintz, most of them New Yorkers, Professor Menachem Schmelzer, who catalogued the collection before the world knew of it, and without whose work I would have been helpless. Dr. Evelyn Cohen, my good friend and careful editor, who added her profound knowledge, as you just have seen, to the harsh editorial work. And Professor Shalom Sabar of Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Gabriel Goldstein of Yeshiva University Museum, Elke Deitch of Temple Emmanuel Museum, and Mariah Chamberlain-Hellman. Special mention must be made here, I must say, of the photographer, the Israeli photographer of the Braganza collection, Ardon Bar-Chama, who's also responsible for the phenomenal website. I mean, we can show the sort of images that we're showing you through his wonderful work. My lecture today is listed as Hebrew books after Gutenberg, and that's quite a topic for 35 to 40 minutes. 541 years have passed since the first Hebrew book was printed. Allow me to pay some attention to the first Hebrew printed books and to Hebrew printed books in general first, before I go to the handwritten ones. It's necessary for a proper understanding of what I'm going to say later, and it may be interesting in its own right, for that matter. This is an image that you've seen already, Rome 1469, 1472, Nachmanides commentary. And between 1469 and 1472, the first 6 Hebrew books were printed by 3 printers, Obadiah, Manasseh, and Benjamin of Rome. The most likely order of production of these books was established by my predecessor, Adrie Offenberg, in 2005, on the basis of careful typographical analysis and paper analysis of the holdings of the British Library in London and the Bibliotheca Rosenthaliana in Amsterdam. This analysis does not permit a more precise dating of the individual books. And the Braganza collection contains this wonderful copy of the 6th work in Offenberg's list. The only edition actually in which the names of the printers is actually mentioned. I'm going to swap it to this side because it makes it easier to read. So if we look at this very carefully, the 6 books that we have here, it must be emphasized, by the way, that the world's second specialist, the 2 specialists of 140 Hebrew books of the 15th century. One of them is Adrie Offenberg, my predecessor at the library. The second is Shimon Jakkerson of St. Petersburg, who actually catalogued the Hebrew collections of the JTS here in New York. And he isn't as sure about the order of printing of these 6 Hebrew books as is Adrie Offenberg, so that's very important. And a quick look at the nature of these first 6 texts ever printed in Hebrew is interesting. The 2 dictionaries, 3 Bible commentaries, and the book of Rabbinical Responsa. No Bibles, no prayer books, no Talmud, no scientific books. It's interesting. Although this would soon be corrected in the course of the 15th century, and other genres would appear in print as well, the rarity in this very early period, for example, of copies of the earliest editions of Rashi's commentaries, is not an indication that these books are not printed, but most probably an indication of the popularity. We simply no longer have them, as some people assume. I mean, the popularity. So in the 15th century, generally, the book with the most copies that we have is actually Avicenna's Medical Canon. There's a reason for that. No one read it. I mean, so it may sound pedestrian, but I think it's true, actually. The 6 Rome imprints precede the book that many non-specialists continue to quote erroneously, actually, as the first printed Hebrew book, and which is Rashi's commentary on the Pentateuch. It's finished on the 17th of February 1475 in Reggio di Calabria, and it is the first printed Hebrew book mentioning a date. So in total there were at least 140 Hebrew books printed in the 15th century, produced by approximately 40 presses, active in Italy, Spain and Portugal, and by 1 in Turkey. In the first half of the 16th century, that is after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal in the late 15th, the most important Hebrew printing presses were situated in Venice, Mantua, Sabbioneta, Cremona, and outside of Italy in Constantinople and Salonika. Ashkenazic centers of importance were Krakow, Augsburg, Basel, and Prague. After the Antwerp printer Daniel van Bomberg and Daniel Bomberg, with close contacts with Christopher Planten's circles, established his printing press in Venice in 1516, Italy, and particularly Venice, determined the phase of 16th century Hebrew printing. During that century, close to 900 Hebrew books were published in Venice alone. This is one of the many standard editions of Jewish traditional literature that Bomberg published, the Talmud Yerushalmi of 1523. It's interesting, actually, that Bomberg claims in his introduction that he based this edition on a number of manuscripts, which actually shows a critical effort on the part of a printer cooperating with a Christian printer cooperating with Jewish scholars, a critical effort to produce a critical text. But comparison of this text to the only known complete manuscript of the Talmud Yerushalmi still in existence, which is now held in Leiden University Library, only 30 miles away from my house, has shown actually that it's quite probable that the Leiden manuscript is actually the only manuscript that Bomberg used for the edition, because the edition is quite similar, and there seems not to have been a critical effort. But it's interesting to realize that already in the early 16th century, printers would set store to the idea of a critical text based on more than one edition. In the Braganza Collection, there's another important edition of a Jewish classic, Rashi's commentary on the Pentateuch and the 5 scrolls, which are already shown, printed in 1522. And this particular manuscript allows us a first glimpse into Hebrew manuscript production after the invention of printing. At the end of the Braganza copy, in a cursive Ashkenazic hand of the second half of the 16th century, a certain David of Fla, P. Lamed Aleph, copied from what he calls a wonderful book, a small part of a rare mystical text. It is the introduction to the commentary to Shi'ur Koma, which means the measure of the body of God, of Moses ben Elazar, who is an Ashkenazic mystic of the early 14th century. And the text belongs to the unique Cherub Circle, which is a mystical Ashkenazic school of mystics and esoterics. And only one other manuscript, copied in 1583, containing a similar text is known and is kept in the Zentralbibliothek in Zurich. It's interesting that Zurich would hold to 2 versions of such a text. At the end of the text, David admits to having copied this text, which I do not understand. At the bottom he said, She'en anime vingato, which I don't understand, because he didn't want to tear the book apart or burn it, perhaps on account of its controversial content. A particular interesting aspect of 16th century and 17th century Italian Hebrew book is the near omnipresence of inquisitional censorship. From the second half of the 16th century onward, Christian censors, who were often converted Jews, would check all Hebrew books, would often sign them after checking, and expurgate passages that were considered negative towards Christianity. Apart from the obvious anti-Jewish, or better, anti-heretical stance of the Inquisition, one of the most prosaic explanations for this censorship may be financial. Jews, both printers and private owners of books, both printed books and manuscript books, were expected to pay for the work of the censor. Christian censorship also led to active Jewish self-censorship, of which there are medieval examples in the Braganza Collection, for which, however, I gladly refer to the exhibition in Yeshiva University Museum. The censor of this daily prayer book, according to the Ashkenazic rite from the Braganza Collection, which was copied, this is actually the prayer book that we saw the Haggadah image from, which copies most probably in the Rhineland around 1400, did not expurgate any passages, and rather only signed his name on the last page. The Domenico Hierosolomitana, who worked in Mantua. And signatures and entries by censors are, of course, proof of Italian ownership at the time of censorship, which is interesting for our understanding of what's going on. On the 9th of September 1553, after Pope Julius III had declared that all copies of the Talmud in Rome be gathered together, thousands of these and other Jewish books were set alight in the Campo dei Fiori. These public events were part of a strategy that developed in the 1540s and 1550s and resulted in the banning and burning of larger groups of Jewish and non-Jewish heretical books. In Venice, similar measures were taken, and all such books were burned in the Piazza San Marco on the 21st of October in 1553. A unique collection of 11 documents in Italian, which relate to this dark period in the history of the Hebrew book, now in the Braganza Collection, may have been part of a file that once belonged to a Venetian inquisitor. The documents constitute a chronological account of the events in Venice, and shown here is part of a letter of the 9th of September 1553, confirming that at the Campo dei Fiori in Rome the burning of the Talmud took place and that a similar edict was probably to be issued in Venice. In the course of the 17th century, Amsterdam took over Venice's leading role in Hebrew book production. The first Jew to print in Hebrew in Amsterdam was Manasseh ben Israel, and I quote Cecil Roth from his 1934 biography of Manasseh ben Israel. The figure of the bearded, stoutish rabbi in a short cloak and steeple hat, allow me to just be proud of Amsterdam, so I come up with this quote. The figure of the bearded, stoutish rabbi, old Amsterdam, in a short cloak and steeple hat, must have been familiar along the banks of the Amsterdam canals. As he paced them in company with some of his non-Jewish acquaintances, deep in conversation about some abstruse point of scholarship. Sometimes he would escort his learned companions to the synagogue to show them the manner in which Jewish worship was conducted. They would come again occasionally, unasked, to hear him preach. When they left Amsterdam, he corresponded with them regularly and affectionately. They accepted the dedications of his works, couched in the most intimate terms, to which they sometimes reciprocate in kind. They frequently enriched his productions, according to the fashion of the period, with complimentary sonnets or epistles. It was not often in that intolerant age that any Jew, much less a rabbi, received so cordial a reception in Christian circles. And if his non-Jewish friend, almost without exception, looked forward with pathetic eagerness to his conversion, they did not always labor the point. Thus the Dutch rabbi's good nature became famous far beyond the shores of the Zuiderzee. I love that line. Manasseh ben Israel printed a large number of books, not only for the newly established Portuguese Jewish community of Amsterdam, but also for the Western and Eastern European market. Other Amsterdam printers of importance were Emmanuel ben Veniste, Uri Feivisch ben Aaron Alevi, David de Castro Tatas, and the members of the printing dynasties of the Atias and Probst families. What we see here is the title page, actually, of Manasseh's first Hebrew book. The first Hebrew book printed in Amsterdam by a Jew. There have been some efforts, and there have actually been some Hebrew books printed in Amsterdam by a Puritan English theologian by the name of Hugh Broughton. And those are very interesting books, which are the cause, they are the reason that Manasseh's books are not the first Hebrew books printed in Amsterdam, the first Hebrew books printed in Amsterdam by a Jew. We only know 3 copies, and one of them is in the Valmadonna Trust Library collection. And before it was offered for sale, I had hoped to get hold at least of that one particular book, but I've given up hopes now. It's a daily prayer book according to the Sephardic Rite, financed by Ephraim Bueno and Abraham Safati, and they assumed great prominence on the title page. It was mainly through Manasseh ben Israel that Amsterdam took on the role of world leader in the provision of Hebrew books, formerly held by Venice, and it was Manasseh ben Israel who played a decisive role in the development of the much-praised Hebrew letters of Amsterdam, which would in the course of the late 17th and early 18th centuries become the reference point for clear, good quality Hebrew printing. A preface to the prayer book was written by one who was to be of great influence on Manasseh's later life. He was actually his greatest competitor, but it was in this case his learned corrector of the text, the Chacham Isaac Abo da Fonseca. And he explained the circumstances under which Manasseh's Hebrew type was developed, introduced by the words Amar HaMagilla, the corrector spoke. Manasseh ben Joseph ben Israel, seeing the Bomberg types worn out, and since nothing can be imperfect for the holy work, arose from within the community, and went out and came to the house of an artisan. And behold, he was standing there at his work, the tools of his trade in his hand. He said to him, Behold, the money is given to you in the shapes of the letters to make as is good in the eyes of the honorable and respected Michael Judah, first among the scribes. May the Lord consummate his work, and may his reward from the Lord God of Israel be complete. The man swore in real writing to make them for him and for no other man. He shaped them with the burin and made them good to look at and fine to read, as perfect as if cast in gold. And there were two men, read Ephraim Bueno and Abraham Safati, the two financiers, who were amazed to see the completeness of the work and its beauty. It lifted up their hearts to bring the work of printing a little sidur, the like of which had never been seen since there were printers on the earth. The printed script of Manasseh's books clearly had to be genuinely Sephardic, and therefore had to be approved of by the most competent public official, the local scribe, Michael Judah Leon. The superiority of Amsterdam's Hebrew type over Hebrew type in other countries, to which I will return, must be seen in the light of a European development of Sephardic Hebrew type, which started already in the 15th century and continued especially in Italy, Antwerp and Leiden in the 16th century, and should therefore not be exaggerated. Actually, Manasseh's corrector Isaac Aboab was very much aware of this, as he referred explicitly to the Bomberg types being worn out. Daniel van Bombergen of Venice's Hebrew types, Christopher Planten of Antwerp's Hebrew types, which were partly taken directly actually from Bomberg's shop after Bomberg had left Venice to return to Antwerp in 1549, and Franciscus Ravellengius of Leiden's Hebrew types were all Sephardic, as was the type material of most other prominent Italian printers of the 16th and early 17th centuries. This chart compares Manasseh's Hebrew type with Guillaume Lebet's standard square script, square of the 16th century. And the innovation, so Manasseh's is on top and Lebet is at the bottom. And the innovation doesn't seem to be impressive. I mean, this is 16th century script and 17th century script, and leaves room, in my opinion, for an assumption that part of the fame of the Amsterdam printed Hebrew books of the 17th and 18th centuries goes back to the quality of the paper, of the design, of the illustrations in a number of the most famous books, and on the great intellectual variety of their content, rather than on the famous Otiot Amsterdam alone. On a more general level, it may be stated that the Amsterdam printing business, with its vast international network of authors and readers, its high-quality output, and its close contact with the surrounding non-Jewish world, constituted the last stage in the industrialization and professionalization of Hebrew printing. This is all the printing history that I needed. The invention of printing certainly didn't bring an end to the production of Hebrew manuscripts, but it goes without saying that the Hebrew handwritten book lost part of its popularity. In the course of the 16th century, manual copying of Hebrew text became a more marginal phenomenon, especially in Europe. The production of Hebrew manuscripts since the invention of printing may be divided roughly into 6 overlapping categories: Sefer Torah, prayer books, single sheet manuscripts, including Ketubot and Megillot, which are not single sheet, autographs, learned texts, Oriental manuscripts, an 18th century decorated manuscript copied Bibliotheca Amsterdam. I will deal with each of them separately. First, there were liturgical texts, as I mentioned, Sefer Torah, that had to be written by hand according to Jewish law. Sefer Torah, Tfilin, Mezuzot. Descriptions of the rules and practices connected with the copying of these texts may be found in the vast body of medieval and post-medieval tracts on the topic. Among which Moses Maimonides, Hilchot Sefer Torah, and his Halachikot Mishneh Torah is probably the best known. Many of these texts were derived from the extra-canonical Talmudic tractate Sofrim. Second, there's always been a tendency among Jewish communities to use written rather than printed prayer books during synagogue services. This practice was particularly common in the German-speaking world, but we have examples from all corners of the diaspora. This is an example from the Braganza Collection. The Kabbalists of Tzfad designed special daily prayer books that contained not just the statutory prayers, but also prayers with mystical content. The authorship of this prayer book is generally attributed to the most famous Tzfad Kabbalist, Yitzhak ben Shlomo Luria. This particularly attractive manuscript, copied with numerous initial words made up of letters in alternating colors, was copied by or for a certain Shmuel HaKohen in Ungarisch Brod, Moravia, between 1673 and 1683. And this is another example, one that's from the Braganza Collection, actually not shown in the exhibit, We had to leave out a couple of items for many reasons, including lack of space and lack of time, and in my case, lack of knowledge. This is one that we left out, a daily prayer book, which was actually Sedet Filot Mikol Shana, Keminagenu Po Kuf Kuf Dessau, so the Kilako de Shah Dessau in Germany. It was copied in 1764, and again, it shows the prominence of handwritten books rather than printed books for use during prayer books for use during synagogue services. The third category of post-medieval Hebrew manuscripts includes single decorated sheets, Ketubot, Ten Commandment sheets, Omer calendars, decorated scrolls, which are made up of more than one sheet usually. Occasionally psalms are done on scrolls, and there's some smaller biblical books, and all sorts of calligraphic art. And Dr. Evelyn Cohen has discussed most of these, and for the rest I don't have time here. The fourth important category of Western post-medieval Hebrew manuscripts are those that most probably that probably may be compared best to the non-Hebrew counterparts, such as autograph manuscripts, literary remains, bound correspondences, archival material. That's the sort of thing that we librarians deal with all the time. Connected with these is what may perhaps be considered a subcategory, that of learned texts that were not distributed in print, but rather in manuscripts. There may have been many reasons for this, ranging from lack of money to lack of public interest, to, comparable to prayer books, a particular appreciation of handwritten rather than printed text. This unpublished autograph manuscript was copied in the old Jewish community of Worms. It contains commentaries on the prayer book, the Grace After Meals, Passover Haggadah, and Pirkei Avot, the sayings of the fathers. Interspersed with records of prayer rituals and autobiographical remarks, it's interspersed with records of prayer rituals and autobiographical remarks. Its author is Yuspa, the Shamash of the Worms community. He was a talented writer, and his works are a mine of information on Jewish life in Worms. Sifrei Avonot, containing calendar calculations, were popular in the Germanic lands after the Julian calendar was changed in October 1582. And many manuscripts of these particular texts of the Sifrei Avonot, the Sefer Avonot, exist. A frequent image is that of Issachar, one of Jacob's sons, whose offspring is referred to in the Book of Chronicles as, I quote, men who knew how to interpret the signs of the times. The manuscript shown here, produced around 1670, 1671, incorporates another common element, the moon with a human face, here in two variants. And I owe my understanding, and we, the scholarly world, owe our understanding of this particular group of Sifrei Avonot manuscript to a recent article, I think it's 2007, in Ars Judaica, by the New York scholar Elisheva Karlebach. I find that it's the first article ever written on the topic in there, and it shows, actually, it goes to show how the content of a particular text and the illustration tradition of a particular text go together, and how the one cannot be understood without the other. The post-medieval situation in Oriental countries differed considerably from that in the Occident. Because printed books were usually scarce in the Oriental countries, there was often always almost medieval demand for handwritten books. Therefore, for Oriental manuscripts, which are actually the fifth group of post-medieval manuscripts, a distinction between medieval and post-medieval is rather artificial. This is an autograph of Shlomo Adeni. He was born in Yemen in 1567, but he lived in the land of Israel most of his life. He suffered many personal tragedies and lived in great poverty. He worked on his Mishnah commentary for 30 years and originally wrote it in the margins of his printed editions. And he was too poor to have the book, to write the book in full, and he could only write down the actual commentary after a richer person from his community presented him with reams of paper to transcribe his partly illegible notes into a coherent work. This is the book that we're looking at. When I was touring people through the exhibition in Amsterdam, I would usually point out to them that this is probably the ugliest book in the exhibition. I mean, it isn't great art, but it tells a story that is actually the story of Hebrew manuscripts, and it's a story of a Jewish scholar going through trouble to have his scholarly insights written down in a proper book with the help of a richer person from his community. The last group of Hebrew manuscripts after Gutenberg that I would like to concentrate on now were written during the 18th century. Beotiot Amsterdam, with Amsterdam letters in Central and Northern Europe. Apart from several dozen surviving decorated daily and festival prayer books, which were meant primarily for synagogue use, these manuscripts were usually deluxe Passover rituals, books of Psalms, prayer books for the Sabbath, and smaller collections of occasional prayers, such as circumcision manuals. The manuscripts were commissioned by middle-class and upper-class Jews whose names appear on many title and dedication pages. One of the most striking characteristics of what was often called the 18th century school of Hebrew manuscript illumination is the fact that the manuscripts were modeled after contemporary printed Hebrew books, especially those of Amsterdam, which were esteemed highly, as I already mentioned, for the typographical quality. Many European printers, from the end of the 17th century onward, even went so far as to print the word Amsterdam in large type at the bottom of the page, where one would actually expect the name of the place of printing. And they would have the name of printing printed in very small type, either on the title page or even at the back of the book. So any buyer would think that the book was actually from Amsterdam, but it was only Botiot Amsterdam. You can find it a lot. There's different forms. Actually, the prominence of this idea of the Otiot Amsterdam is best proven by a printed book that I recently saw in Philadelphia from the Vendramina Press, 1702 in Venice, where it actually said that the book was printed Knipat by Amsterdam, so as printed in Amsterdam. So even in the early 18th century in Venice, printers, rather than being proud of their own Phoenician background, would claim that their book was printed Botiot Amsterdam in order to stimulate the sale of their books. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. The presence of the word Amsterdam indicated that the book was printed with the letters of Amsterdam and not in the city of Amsterdam. And the Hebrew scribes of the 18th century adopted this custom. And many scribes indicated that their manuscripts were copied in the style of the Amsterdam imprints. And we actually have page-per-page copies of printed books which were copied by Otiot Amsterdam and made to look like printed Amsterdam books, but they are actually handwritten. In certain cases, you're not going to believe your eyes. Today, a maximum of 500 decorated Central and Northern European Hebrew manuscripts of the 18th century survive. The earliest manuscript produced during this revival, I know that Vivian Mann, who's present here, thinks differently, but I claim that the earliest manuscript produced during this revival, well, you publish a different thing, is almost certainly, but that's why I say almost certainly, is a magnificent daily prayer book copied in Vienna between 1712 and 1714 by Arie ben Jude of Trebitsch, Moravia, which is now in the library of JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary here in New York. It's self-puzzling why the new phenomenon would start off with such an elaborate daily prayer book, whereas the large majority of later manuscripts are smaller. Possibly the new fashion developed out of the existing custom of producing handwritten synagogue prayer books with occasional decoration, which were often donated to Jewish communities by the well-to-do. Once one scribe came up with the idea to write his manuscripts in accordance with the Amsterdam printed book tradition, perhaps others followed. In any case, most of the later, usually smaller manuscripts were apparently prepared not for the upper class, but many of them for the middle class market. Actually, this is an interesting scribe, Arie ben Jude Trebitsch. The image that you see here, this entire page here, is actually printed into a manuscript. So this is a printed page, a printed border, printed by this guy into a manuscript. So he went through the trouble of bringing the parchment page, of bringing it to a printer, and there were no printers, Hebrew printers in Vienna at the time, and he put it in there. I mean, we have another manuscript from this particular, and he did it in a number of manuscripts, including one in the Jewish Museum or the one in, sorry? Yeah, I know, there's one in the British Library, one in the Jewish Museum, and one in JTS. But he doesn't use the printing technique. I don't know from the top of my head, but he doesn't use the printing technique in all of these. I think the British Library one doesn't have printed images.
The one in the Jewish Museum, the images are pasted in.
Yeah, it's even more. I wrote an article on it in which I discuss the various versions. But some of it contains printing directly onto the parchment. Some of it is pasted in, and some of it is drawn. We have another manuscript, unfinished actually, a title page, unfinished by the same guy in the Jewish Museum in Vienna, which was copied by Otiot Amsterdam, but he claims on the title page, which we have, that was done by Otiot Prague. And they are Otiot Amsterdam, they are Sephardic letters. So this is one of the reasons why I believe that he was the initiator of this custom to copy by Otiot Amsterdam, because quite clearly he was aware of what's going on in the printed world, and he was interested in both in printing and in handwriting. At first, the 18th century artists copied directly from their printed models and even tried to imitate in pen and ink their charistic copper engravings. But soon the artists felt the urge to create their own illustrations. They usually maintained the most important elements of the Amsterdam compositions, but changed the costumes, furniture, and decor, in order to make the reader of the manuscript feel more at home with them. As already mentioned, the most important centers of this 18th century decorated Hebrew manuscript production were northern Germany and the Bohemian-Moravian region, but there are examples of decorated Hebrew manuscripts written by Otiot Amsterdam with the letters of Amsterdam from practically all Western European countries, including Italy, France, the northern Netherlands, and even England. Part of the explanation of the renewed interest in Hebrew manuscript decoration in Germanic court circles, and subsequently in the Germanic lands in general, certainly lies in the fact that the well-off Jews experienced a good life at the courts, where great emphasis was laid on the possession of books and well-kept libraries. These were the days in which the Austrian emperor had the so-called Prunksaal, the exquisite Baroque reading room in the Kaiserliche und Königliche Hofbibliothek in Vienna built. And these were also the days in which many Central European palaces, castles, private houses and monasteries were given their often wonderful libraries. The Bibliotheca Rosenthaliana in Amsterdam ranks among the world's largest collections of decorated Hebrew manuscript with Amsterdam letters in the world, with some 20 books. The Library of the Jewish Theological Seminary here in New York is by far the largest institutional collection of these manuscripts, with almost 50 items. Within the framework of a worldwide repertory of decorated Hebrew manuscripts, I've gathered data on approximately 500 of these manuscripts, including those in private collections. And there are some good private collections. There are actually a couple of private collectors here with good private collections, also in the city, with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 prize items. But what about the Braganza Collection, which was critically acclaimed as the largest private collection of Hebrew manuscripts in the world? It contains over 50 items, which actually makes it larger than any institutional library in the world, any institutional collection in the world. I will now show a number of the most important items in the collection, in the Braganza Collection, improvising on what we see while I click through them. This is actually a Sod Hashem and Shavita Zahav, a circumcision manual with a circumcision scene here at the very bottom by the same scribe, Aryeh ben Yehuda Leib Trebitsch, who started off, I think, the phenomenon, done in 1716. And we have another interesting image here, which is not unproblematic. It's very hard to describe because this is an image of Tobias with a fish on his shoulder and the Archangel Raphael on the left, which is actually taken from the apocryphal book of Tobit. And I find it very difficult to understand why an image like this, why such a Christian image would actually be part, or a non-Jewish image would be part of a circumcision manual. And the only explanation that I've come up with, and I'm aware of its the problematic nature, but it's the only explanation that I can give, is the fact that the Archangel Raphael is often considered a guardian angel of children within Catholicism. So probably within this Catholic surroundings of Vienna, this artist decided to include this particular image into a circumcision manual. I say it with a lot of caution, because I'm not as convinced myself as I was when I wrote it in the catalog, but that's actually the notice. The notice on the for this afternoon said that you're going to learn about scholarship, and this is what scholarship is all about. Just don't be too sure of yourself. Certainly not when you write it down. This is another manuscript that said the Perek Shirah. Perek Shirah is an interesting text containing all sorts of hymnical quotes largely from the book of Psalms, but also from other books of the Bibles, which are being put in the mouth of God's creatures. And it's a hymnical collection of works just glorifying God's nature. It said a Perek Shirah, Ha'omeroto b'chol yom, Yehe muftach shehu ben olam haba. So it's good that you read it because you're going to be part of the world to come. And he says, Cherut al haluchot, L'Shem ha'aluf ha'katzim ha'mefosam, and then it has the name of the person who ordered it, a guy from the name of a person from Darmstadt. But the interesting use is the use of the words Cherut al haluchot. So actually the artist of this particular work, Meshulam Zimmel of Polna, who is known for a number of items with very detailed penwork, claims that he actually engraved the images onto the plates, which is not true. I mean, they're drawn, the drawings, but again, it shows that he deliberately copied, as I already mentioned, the engravings from the printed books, and even used the wording on the title page engraved onto the plate as if the audience was to believe that he actually engraved the things rather than the other. And we know for a fact also that he was active as a copper engraver. So it makes sense for him to be doing that. This is another image where it says Shirla Behemoth for cattle, which is a very, very detailed image. And I like his pen work very much, actually. I think that he's one of the most accomplished artists of this period. This is a title page of a Haggadah done by Aaron Schreiber Hellingen, Vienna, 1725. Aryeh Yudeleib Trebitsch, whom I mentioned, was the third artist who worked for the court Jews of Vienna. But the most prolific Hebrew scribe in Vienna was another Moravian by the name of Aaron ben Benjamin Ze'ev Schreiber Hellingen. He was born around the turn of the century into a well-to-do Jewish family in Gewitz, Moravia. He must have left Gewitz sometime in his youth, as his manuscript reproduced in Pressburg and Vienna. In Pressburg, his name was recorded in the 1736 census of Jews living in that city as, I quote, the Moravian Aaron of Gewitz, official in the Imperial Library in Vienna. 1 wife, 1 assistant, 1 handmaid. On many of his title pages and on a Braganza manuscript that I will show shortly, Aaron Schreiber Hellingen mentions explicitly his connection with the Imperial and Royal Library in Vienna. The fact that he held such a position is sustained by an anonymous 1762 letter to the Empress Maria Theresa, in which the advice was given to allow the verwittigten Bibliotheekschreiberin Veronica Aronin, the library scribe Aaron's widow, Veronica, to open a kosher restaurant for foreign travelers. Aaron Schreiber Hellingen must have died sometime in the preceding decade, and I haven't found so far a record of an official record in the Vienna Library of his position as a library scribe there. So we must doubt the prominence of his position within the framework of the library, but he was certainly proud of it. The Hungarian scholar Ernest Nemenyi, author of one of the very few serious articles on the 18th century school of Hebrew manuscript artists, once described, I mean, I wrote a couple, but as I just told you, they may not be as serious as I claim that they are. Once described the works of Hellingen as follows, I quote, Aaron Wolf was an excellent penman. All of his works have a definite graphic character. His pen drawings, sometimes set off by coloring, are very neatly executed with perfect craftsmanship and impeccable taste, but very often dryly academic. His talents were eminently graphic, and he only painted to enhance his drawings, unquote. Although this description doesn't do full justice to the quality of his painted manuscripts, apparently because it was based on just a small part of his production, there's something to it. Some of his most impressive work is indeed highly calligraphic, or micrographic to be more precise. Illustrated in this respect are no less than 5 extant illustrated single sheets manuscripts that he did, of sizes generally smaller than modern US letter, containing the text of the 5 Megillot in 5 different Semitic and European languages and types of script. Probably his most impressive work is a miniature Magilla, which is now held in the British Library in London, which is as big as a matchbox. And it contains, beside the complete text of the Book of Esther in 3 columns of 64 lines of text and 2 benedictions, also 3 miniature illustrations, executed in a way similar to the aforementioned single-sheet manuscripts. Although the work is unsigned, the execution leaves no doubt as to the identity of the scribe. Bryn Mawr College Library in Philadelphia holds a slightly larger Megillah with 8 illustrations, and it measures 2.7 by 6 inches only. And here's the image. Here you see the image. Here you get a sense of the detail. This is unbelievable. I mean, it's this big. It's nothing. I mean, it's unbelievable that what you're looking at here, and also the amount of detail that you can see here. Bryn Mawr College, it was actually first shown in an exhibit that David Stern did, who was also in the audience, and who am I not to mention his name, that David Stern did in Philadelphia a couple of years ago. This is, in 1751, Aaron Wolf Hellingen wrote this calligram, a decorative form created from a written text, which is now in the Braganza Collection and shown in the Braganza exhibit, with the Latin text of the Catholic 7 penitential psalms and of Psalm 138 for Prince Joseph II, the son of Empress Maria Theresa and Emperor Francis I. It's not known how this masterpiece and other works dedicated to the imperial family produced by Aron Herling and Meshulam Zimmel were presented to the court, if at all. Here you get a sense of what he was doing. So at the very bottom you can see Aron Wolf, 1751, right there. And here you get another one. At the very bottom you can see his name, Aron Wolf, Kaiserliche Königliche Bibliothek Schrijver in Wien, anno 1751. So he was Royal and Imperial Library Scribe in 1751. I told you that I've been in the lucky position, as the group of people that worked in the exhibit was, to see the original manuscripts. Now the manuscript can also be seen on the website. I decided that I was just going to show you, as if leaving through the manuscript, this one Haggadah from 1725 in its entirety. Just quickly giving you a sense of what we're looking at. You can redo this on the website at braganzacollection.com. This is actually the title page, with an image of Aaron, Moses, and below here a very and not too easy image, which among others contains the figure of Miriam, which leads us to believe actually in Miriam's well, which leads us to believe actually that this Haggadah may well have been done for a woman by the name of Miriam. Here we have the Simonei Seder Pesach and the Chomas battle and the looking for the Chomas, and the Kiddush Shel Pesach, Kahal Lachmania. And we can see here the way in which these handwritten books try to emulate the idea of a printed book. I mean, it's very important to keep that in mind, the Otiot Amsterdam. Here we have a wonderful image of the 5 sages in Bnei Barak and of the 4 sons on the left. And the 5 sages in Bnei Barak are actually an exception. In many 18th century Hebrew manuscripts, there's going to be you will find more than 5 sages. And the reason for that is that in the famous Amsterdam printed Haggadah of 1695 and 1712, the image of the 5 sages in Bnei Barak is this very image where you can see a lot more people, and that is because these images were taken from a Christian source, Matthäus Merians Icones Biblicae, where actually this is the image of the festive meal that Joseph prepared for his brothers in Egypt. And they've just taken it, put it into the Haggadah, and put it there. And here is the image of the 4 sons, as we'll find it there. And going back to the piece, you can see that even the gesture of the small son, as you see it here, is similar to the thing that you see here. You can see that on the one hand they were independent, but on the other hand they depended strongly on printed images. Here we have an image of Abram slaying the idols of his fathers, of Abram and the 3 angels, of the children of Israel, the exodus from Egypt, of Moses slaying the Egyptian, of Moses being found in the Nile, Moses and Aaron before Pharaoh, the snakes, the 10 plagues. Here again, the 10 plagues, a strong dependence on the Amsterdam model. The inclusion of these small vignettes for the 10 plagues is based on the Amsterdam image here in 1712. Here we have the Egyptians drowning in the sea, Matan Torah, beautiful image. We can see that the Haggadah was used. If a Haggadah is not used, it means that it was in the hands of a Christian. I mean, we have a couple of 18th century Haggadot which were actually commissioned by Christian owners, and they don't have the stains where you would expect them. It's a very interesting experience. We have a couple of examples. We know that 18th century manuscripts were ordered by them. Then we have the part where everyone has to sit through. Then here's the Shvoch, here's King David, based again on the image of a kneeling King David in the Amsterdam Haggadah, not particularly Jewish posture. We continue here. Here we have a beautiful image with the Yiddish translation of Adiru, Allmächtiger Gott, with an image of the temple, and a new invention of the scribes of the 18th century, images going with Chad Miodea and Chad Gadya, which are actually worth a separate study. Go to the website and see for yourself. The actual revival of manuscript illumination in 18th century Europe is generally believed to end around the year 1675. And it is connected with the beginning assimilation of Jewish masses in the Germanic lands, with an intellectual decline in many communities, certainly in Amsterdam, and with an improvement of printing techniques and the shift towards publishing companies rather than printers who distributed their own products in the world of the printed book. So the printed book world professionalized. But Hebrew manuscripts were still produced after that. Here we have a Haggadah done in 1696 by Herman Binger in Amsterdam as a pious exercise, and we know that he did a number of manuscripts for his family members. We have a Moel booklet done as late as 1816, part of a group of manuscripts that was done in Hungary, in Nitra in Hungary in 1816, with a beautiful micrographic picture of Moses. We have the beautiful Charlotte van Rothschild Haggadah of 1842, which I already mentioned. So we have more than that, but basically the school stopped. A few concluding remarks. I mean, our understanding of post-medieval Hebrew manuscript decoration owes a lot to David Kaufman, who was the first to approach these in a completely unbiased manner, as early as 1898 it is. This was really a novelty, since earlier scholars of the Wissenschaft des Judentums ignored the illustrations and illuminations in the description of manuscripts, and usually disliked them. This is even more true of post-medieval manuscripts than of medieval manuscripts. I remember a description by Moritz Steinschneider of an 18th century Hebrew manuscript in Berlin, where he states that, I paraphrase, the elaborate illustrations were executed with an astounding tastelessness that one would not even expect from a German Jew of the 18th century. Brett Hill, now of Washington, has once suggested to me that I should publish a listing of all pejorative phrases on illustrated manuscript of the 18th century. Such a listing, which I do not intend to publish, by the way, would contain a whole range of great adjectives: uninteresting, not uninteresting, uninspired, not entirely uninspired, tasteless, weak, short-lived, rather boring, and so forth. But, and listen carefully now, in many cases the negative judgments, if not fully justified, are at least understandable in my opinion. The issue of objective or even of relative quality is a big issue in post-medieval books, as is the issue of originality. But part of this has to do with the way in which we look at these books and with the questions that we ask, or quite often as well with the questions that we don't ask. I would like to argue here that the traditional approach to these books, in which illustrations or illustration cycles are described on a one-to-one basis, urgently needs expansion. Obviously, most studies do mention the text with which the illustrations appear, and clearly many illustrations are indeed compared with more or less related illustrations. But it's about time that newer, larger questions are given priority. The last 10 years saw the development of a completely new field of research called book history, as opposed to, or better even alongside, more traditional designations, such as bibliography and codicology. And the new field even has its own journal, which is also called book history, and which, I quote, is devoted to every aspect of the history of the book, broadly defined as the history of the creation, dissemination, and reception of script and print. There's great potential in this new field of book history for future research of illustrated Hebrew books of the post-medieval period. Questions that seem to be so much more relevant than mere more or less elaborate comparative description are the function of illustrations in the transmission of knowledge, their importance for our understanding of the development of public taste, their potential to provide us with deeper insight into differences in taste of different social classes, the commercial value, the insight they may provide us into the mechanics of book production, again both handwritten and printed, the cross-cultural nature, and the insight they provide us in the role of artistic originality. Allow me to expand shortly on these questions. I don't know how I am time-wise, Jacob. Okay, so I continue. I'll hurry up, don't worry. So I'll concentrate on the function of illustrations in the transmission of knowledge then. I would like to draw your attention to the wonderful Megillah from the Cross Family Collection, was published in a facsimile a few years ago by Michael and Linda Falter of Facsimile Editions in London. And in our introduction to the facsimile, Falk Wieseman and I dated this manuscript to the early 18th century. We see the figure of Mordechai dressed as an 18th century Jew wearing the traditional Shabbos decal. This makes him the only realistic figure here, and the other dramatis personae being fantastic figures created by the artist as part of an exotic fairy tale world. Mordechai's depiction as a contemporary will have allowed the original viewers of the scroll to identify with this idealized example of sincerity and humility. This Megillah seems not only and not primarily about illustration, it's about education. Education that has to be acquired by careful study of the text and illustration as an integral whole. And of course there's an example in the Braganza Collection as well of a Megillah that's in the exhibit. manuscripts, in my opinion, that need more attention are those that reflect artistic originality. And these are often the results, and that's why I showed you the two Megillot here, of the efforts of learned individuals with some artistic skills and not of professional artists. These are often manuscripts that were usually discarded as clumsy folk art. The Braganza Collection and many other institutional collections hold many examples of these folk art manuscripts, and these manuscripts reflect the taste of the Jewish masses. And I know I'm ready. And the Alsatian Magilla that Evelyn Cohen showed is part of that tradition. It may seem to imply a negative judgment of deluxe manuscripts, but that's not what I intend. They're highly original, top-of-the-market manuscripts of the post-medieval period that are worth studying. I've shown a few items from the Braganza Collection already, as is Evelyn Cohen, but one more manuscript, and that's the one that I'm going to use, deserves to be mentioned still. This is the so-called Bouton Haggadah. This is a Haggadah that has this sort of images on every page. These images are actually based on Quran manuscripts that were done in this particular case in Istanbul, but they were popular also in Shiraz in Persia. And they were done by a Christian artist by the name of Victor Bouton. We know from his biography that this Christian artist wrote a Hebrew text using designs which he took from Quran manuscripts in 1870 in France. So it's a very interesting case of interculturality. We don't know exactly why he did it, but we know from his biography, and actually we came across the information on his biography through the Watson Library here, and through Renee Watson at the Watson Library here in the Metropolitan Museum. We know that he, during his lifetime, and in his biography it is mentioned that he once received a sum of 32,000 gold francs for a Haggadah, which he executed for a wealthy Israelite. The only wealthy Israelite in Paris at the time were members of the Rothschild family, most probably. So we assume that this was done for the Rothschild. 32,000 gold francs is a hell of a lot of money. Sharon Mintz and I tried the math, and we ended up, first we ended up being confused, and then we ended up over $1 million in today's money. So big money. And it's an unbelievable manuscript. Every page has a different design based on most probably manuscripts also in the National Library in the Bibliotheca Nationale in Paris. And here you have another page, a beautiful Seder scene from that particular manuscript. It will become easier to study all aspects of post-medieval Hebrew books, manuscripts and printed books, as more visual source material will become available. There are still publishers willing to invest in facsimile editions, and the internet is becoming an ever more important source. Not only libraries are digitizing, but a number of major private collectors, including René Braginski, are building websites of the material as well. Exhibition catalogs have reached new standards, and as long as collectors are buying, Sotheby's and Christie's will find, publish and sell unknown pieces, such as the Bouton Haggadah shown here. And collectors like René Braginski will buy them, and will hopefully share his vision to share them with us, the larger audience. And that was it.
Thank you for that wonderful talk.